Hello and welcome to the Daily Politics.
Are you about to lose your Brexit secretary, Prime Minister?
David Davis is reported to have considered resigning this morning, but he's still Theresa May's Brexit secretary as we go on air. The rows over the government's backstop proposal to prevent a hard border in Ireland. It's expected to be published shortly. Has Theresa May caved in to Brussels or found a sensible compromise? Millions lost their jobs in the 1980s as traditional industries went into decline. Could the coming technological revolution hit the working class even harder? More Brits apply to go on Love Island than to Oxford and Cambridge universities. But which has more to offer? The dreaming spires or TV fame on a sun-soaked island? All that in the next hour. And with us for the whole of the programme today, on our own island of love and harmony, Faiza Shaheen, Director of CLASS, the Centre for Labour and Social Studies, a think tank established to act as a centre for left debate and discussion. Welcome to the programme. So it's not the government's preferred option. But when Theresa May did her deal with the EU in December, they insisted on a backstop arrangement to prevent a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. The government's been trying to turn that agreement into a legal text to put to EU negotiators. But the negotiations in Downing Street over it have been fraught, to say the least. Joining me to discuss all of this is the former Conservative leader and Brexiteer Ian Duncan-Smith, Irish Brexit spokesman Senator Neil Richmond, and The Times' Sam Coates, who's been doing a lot of the running on this story. Welcome to all of you. Sam Coates, what's going on?
If I knew that, I'd be rich. Honestly, this is a story that's unfolding minute by minute. About an hour ago, journalists were told by senior Whitehall people that a deal had been done, that the document would be published today, and that everything was back on track. In other words, the row of the last 24 hours was over. In the last minute or two, there are just starting to be reports that Theresa May will once again see David Davis, and things are not quite concluded. So we are waiting for an absolute resolution. Somebody somewhere has made some progress this morning, and we're trying to find out what it is. Now, as it stands, my understanding is that the document on the backstop hasn't yet changed, but maybe there'll be instructions to change it in the coming hour or two. It's got to be handed over to Brussels today or tomorrow. That's what Downing Street would like to do. So what is it that Theresa May has done or can do to get David Davis back on side? That's the big question. We're all frantically looking at our phones to find out what it is. Now, it's clear to me that David Davis is not alone in his unhappiness with where the proposal was going. And there is a chance that all the Brexiteers in Cabinet line up behind him. So Theresa May could be in quite a perilous position if she doesn't want to climb down to him on the issue of the backstop. But at the same time, it's hard to see how she can, given the kinds of plans that Europe will accept.
How furious was David Davis? We seem to know, because it was clarified on Twitter to some extent, that he was on the verge of resigning.
So we've been here before. David Davis is a regular threatened to resign, or indeed he has resigned twice before. So this is not uncharted territory. And if I'm being completely brutal and sort of unjournalistic about it, I get conflicting reports. Some people who saw him yesterday said he was giving off no vibes whatsoever of resigning, but then he appeared to pick up the phone to journalists and appeared to say some stuff that appeared to lead to reports that said that he would. Different people are saying different things depending on who their audience are. That's not the first time that's ever happened in politics, but it does mean that as of 3 minutes past 12, we're not quite sure what's going on.
Do you share David Davis's concern? And the concern is that there has to be a strict time limit on this backstop proposal so that any alignment to the EU on the customs union beyond transition is time limited. It seemed that that was being taken out of the proposal and that was what caused David Davis to resign. If that is the case, should he quit?
Well, first of all, I have to say I don't know exactly the details of what's going on behind closed doors. He probably knows more than I do.
but I've outlined what the parameters are. If there isn't a time limit, in other words, the UK could stay in perpetuity, closely aligned to the EU, should he quit?
Do I think that is a good idea? The answer is categorically no. I don't think the backstop is a great idea either, by the way, because I think the whole point is this can be resolved, all this stuff resolved, if the political parties involved, the Irish, the British, dare I say it, the EU, actually decide they want to solve this problem before we actually leave. The backstop was there only as a what if we can't, how long for? But there is another problem pending. It's at the end of all of this. You can't simply leave an open-ended process. We will be running to an election in some 2 years after that. And the idea that the UK would still be bumping along inside the customs union by the time you hit the next election is politically intolerable. But secondly, it also opens the door to the EU 27 just to throw a delay into the whole thing if they don't want, because they'll simply say, oh, well, we're still going to have to go round everybody, no one's absolutely happy, you can't go till we've all agreed it. All of a sudden, the power dynamic moves across to the other side. So I would say, if your chief negotiator wants to have some kind of defined end to this process, if he is your chief negotiator, then you probably have to give it to him.
Otherwise, he should quit.
It's up to him. I never advise people what to do.
No, but it's not
myself.
about...
I'm not a great believer in telling other people what to do. They can do what they like, really. But
if he doesn't quit, it will be a sellout. He will have sold out and you will have sold out.
Well, I'm not selling out because I'm not in there doing it, but I have already expressed my views on this. I think, basically, this whole nonsense around the border, and I really do think it is a nonsense, because I think if people of goodwill will resolve this matter, at the moment it's being used as a stick to beat a dog over the negotiations. I think it's sad that it is, because I think there's more in it than that, and I think, therefore, if the government of Ireland and the government of the UK sit down, as they always have done in the past, and resolve this matter themselves, all is resolvable within the timescale. But this backstop becomes a political stick, and it shouldn't be there.
Right. Should, though, David Davis, is this the point? You say it would become politically intolerable if this was allowed to run and run in terms of Britain's close association or alignment to the EU's customs union. Should he take a stand? Should this be the moment?
Look, I don't know what he's doing, and I don't know what the government's doing internally.
What's your view? Would you like him to take a stand on this?
Look, I'm not going to get into that game. All I know is that it's a game at the end of the day. Who's going to
he's the one who's threatened to resign.
My point, all I'm saying to you is that my view, you've asked for my view, here is my view. The Prime Minister indicated that this would be time limited. That was always the clear understanding. The only question is, when is that time limit to be specified, and what is it? That's the only question, not whether it will be time limited, it's when and what will that time limit be.
Well, as Sam Coates has said, David Davis has actually gone back into Downing Street. But let's have a look at the Brexit Secretary a little earlier today, when he left Downing Street number 10, but went back to his own office.
Are you going to resign, Mr. Davis? Will you get your way on the customs backstop? Have you won over the Prime Minister?
Well, that was David Davis there. Do you think he is in an impossible situation?
Well, I think it's a very difficult situation. If you are the chief negotiator, then you need to be trusted to negotiate. And if you believe, as he fundamentally does, and by the way, I think most of the party does too, that you need to have a very clear end stop to this, then I think, and I'm sure the Prime Minister will come to some agreement with him about when that's defined and how it is. The point is, it's not a case of whether, it's a case of when and what that timescale is.
Right. Neil Richmond, first of all of this could be sorted out. It's all a load of nonsense. All of the opposition and the difficulties that the government is finding over the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland.
No, there's a lot there that Ian said that I absolutely just simply disagree with. It's not based in fact. The situation on the island of Ireland is we're 20 years into an extremely fragile peace process that we're trying to resolve, and we have to maintain that. The will of both the European and British negotiating sides is there is no hard border on the island of Ireland. How that is maintained is something that we're trying to negotiate in Brussels. However, 2 years on from Brexit, a year on from triggering Article 50, and 6 months on from a binding political agreement in December, we've yet to see the British government come with any tangible proposals. We hope to see a paper this afternoon, we hope to see it brought to Brussels, and we hope to see Michel Barnier's comments on Friday. However, we've been waiting an awfully long time. Both the British and European sides have agreed that the situation on the island of Ireland is a top 3 negotiating issue, and it's for very good reasons. The Good Friday Agreement is an international peace agreement lodged with the United Nations, of which the British and Irish governments are co-guarantors. And a key thing in this whole discussion, Ireland is Europe. We are remaining as part of the 27 EU member states. This cannot be a Dublin-London negotiation. When you talk about the European Union, that's Ireland. And as soon as people realise that Michel Barnier is our negotiator, we might get an element of progress. Trying to split Ireland off from the remaining 27 isn't successful. It's worth noting that in the last opinion poll, 92% of Irish people want to stay within the European Union.
Right. Ian Duncan-Smith?
Well, I'm sure they do, and I don't have an interest in the internal politics of Ireland, but...
But you do, by Brexit is forcing...
No, I don't. Well, I actually have a view, which is I think the Irish government could be doing a lot more positive about actually settling this. The first thing is, all of this...
You don't realise it's the European Union who's negotiating. It's not trying to split us off.
I did interrupt you for a second, okay? Let me just say something. The real point is that the big issue is what kind of trade relationship we will have with the EU afterwards. And this is the vital question, because that then sets and settles almost everything to do with what kind of border relations you have, both with Ireland and the rest of the EU. And given that Ireland's trade massively is with the UK, you'd think that that would be a #1 priority for them to actually get involved in and help get onto that as quickly as possible.
Well, let Neil
instead of
respond.
this ridiculous linear negotiation, which stops us getting onto trade unless we have some Loctite view about where the border will be.
For a start, it's factually incorrect. When we joined the EC in 1973, 60% of our exports went to the United Kingdom. It's now down to 12%. That's behind the United States, behind Belgium, and indeed behind the whole European Union as a whole. Our biggest market remains the European Union, of which we're staying part of. We want to maintain the closest possible trading and customs relationship with the United Kingdom as an entire European entity post-Brexit. We haven't made this decision, but ultimately both the British and European negotiating sides have identified 3 key priority 1 issues, and unfortunately 2 years after Brexit, we're still talking about the Irish border. We haven't seen the proposals.
Let's
Why
go
don't you get on to talking about trade? Why don't you sit down and get the EU to move on to trade?
Because we've agreed, as is the British government, that we won't... No, because we haven't had...
the most ludicrous negotiation timetable I have ever seen.
But the British government said it.
Well, it's ridiculous.
The British government
set that timetable.
But the British government agreed to it. They triggered Article 50. You can't throw it on us.
I'm sorry. The Irish government could be really playing a good role in here and saying, let's get on to trade, let's settle the trade issue, and we will do in parallel the border issues.
Ireland will always remain the United Kingdom's best friend within the European Union. However, trying to push the situation and trying to blame Ireland for everything is completely irresponsible. Ultimately, Brexit is a decision of the British people. It is up to the British government to therefore at least define some way that they'd like to see Brexit to be. We have yet to see any evidence or any detail about what they want the relationship to be.
Just before I go to Downing Street to talk to our political editor, I mean, it's true, isn't it, Ian Duncan-Smith, if David Davis, with support from Brexiteers like you, said, let's have that backstop presented to the EU, the backstop that says we will remain closely aligned to the EU, let's not put a time limit on it, that would unlock the negotiations that you're so keen to move on to.
And no, I don't think they're the main sticking point around the negotiations. The backstop is not the key. Is not the key issue. I think the reality here is, come June, it's whether or not the EU really wants to get onto trade negotiations or not. We're 14 months in, and we still haven't talked about what our relationship
You say it's not.
afterwards.
You say it's not the key on the backstop, but it's pretty well the key right at this very moment. If we've had a Brexit secretary who's threatened to resign, and a government that cannot get agreement in order to present that proposal to the European Union. So Laura Kunsberg is outside number 10. Laura, I hope you can hear me from the studio. Do we have any idea of what is in the proposal that is expected to be presented to the EU? Has it been signed off?
Oh, well, there's 2 things there, Joe. Yeah, we do have a very clear idea of what's in the proposal, an idea for a temporary customs arrangement where the UK would still have very close links with the European Union, would still have to accept some rulings of the European Court. Has it been signed off? Well, no, it hasn't. And as we speak, David Davis has been called back in to see the Prime Minister again. They met for an hour in the House of Commons this morning, but that meeting, I understand, ended without any agreement. But in the last 10 minutes or so, rather than the cabinet meeting of the inner Brexit team that's meant to start in the next 15 minutes or so, right now the 2 main protagonists in this drama are trying to find a way through. And I'm not really sure if it is a question of compromise. I think it's a question of who is going to back down. And it's pretty clear from some of the conversations I've been having this morning that if the Prime Minister doesn't roll over and back down in the face of David Davis's demands about all of this, he may very well pack up his bags from number 9 Downing Street, just down there, and leave the government. And what happens after that? Well, could be anyone's guess. But I should say this, it may well be that by the end of the day, all is calm, compromises have been arranged, and that, privately there's fury, but publicly the government is, you guessed it, getting on with the job.
Right, so is this the moment, though, of maximum danger, if you like, for Theresa May? Is this the moment, as we've been discussing, that David Davis, her Brexit secretary, as Ian Duncan-Smith described, the main man, as far as he's concerned, in the negotiations, holds a sort of Damocles sword over her head over this issue of a time limit to any alignment of the UK to the EU's customs union?
Yeah, Joe, this is a very, very dangerous moment, one that reminds me of what happened in December, where again, Number 10 and the Whitehall machine believed that they had a deal that would be sellable to Brussels, that they could get through the Parliamentary Party and Brexiteers. And then Brexiteers had a good chance to have a look at it and went, hang on a minute, we can't live with that, we can't put up with that at all. So David Davis is cross about this proposal, and it does seem pretty staggering that the political handlers in Number 10 didn't manage to get the man in charge of Brexit policy in agreement with there and behind this paper before they were going to publish it. But it may well be that this is the moment where he walks off in frustration at what many people see as the Prime Minister's reluctance to show what her position really is. You know, this frustration has been building on both sides for many, many months now. Brexiteers frustrated that the Prime Minister won't argue more forcefully for what they would see as a clean Brexit. She won't push Brussels, she won't stand up to the Remain forces as they would see it. And on the other side, you've got some very powerful Remain voices in Cabinet and on the backbenches who are saying, come on, Theresa May, you have to face these people down, as they would see it. That's the only way you're going to be able to get any compromise. Now, Theresa May, frankly, has been able to stay in office because she has been tiptoeing across this line in the middle. She's had to give a little bit here and then a little bit there. That's how she has survived. But people have darkly, for many months, talked about there will be a moment when she has to choose. It could be, Joe, that this is it.
Right. I mean, if she doesn't stand up to the EU as some Brexiteers see it and David Davis sees it, it will be a sellout, won't it, of the Brexit vision that she set out so very clearly. The negotiating position for the UK will be shot to pieces. The EU will be have no motivation to actually come back and negotiate anything towards the UK's advantage.
Well, that's, of course, the fear, is if you put a proposal on the table that basically would mean, as Brexiteers would see it, it's Hotel California, we've checked out but we never really leave, then, of course, where would the incentive be for the European Union to come up with creative solutions? Where would the incentive be for them to compromise? And also, where would the incentive for Remainers inside government to try to push towards a new solution? But the other problem in all of this, sorry, there's just a bit of shouting, so I need to keep just checking behind me to see if I miss any skullduggery or anybody coming and going. Yeah, because actually a while ago, I should tell you, Boris Johnson emerged, walked down Downing Street and went through the back somewhere. And we don't know if he went into Number 10 or if he went into Number 9 to go and have a little powwow with David Davis. So as soon as we find out what really happened there, we'll
Foreign
bring that
Secretary,
to
will
you.
there be resignation?
But in terms of one of the many problems behind all of this is that this is meant to be the insurance policy, all this fuss over the backstop. It's meant to be the insurance policy. That's what Downing Street will say. Shouldn't be having all this rumpus because it's never going to come to pass. The problem is, not very many people have faith in Number 10 that the other proposals are actually workable.
All right.
So it looks to many people as if the insurance policy is the real policy. And before I disappear down any more kind of Kafkaesque rabbit holes, it's a question of trust and faith in the Number 10 machine. And on the Remain side and on the Brexit side, right now, there is just simply not much faith and trust that they are actually doing a good job. And one senior MP said to me this morning with real frustration, the fact is they are just not good enough. And that's the really dangerous message, not just around here for Theresa May's future, but also for people watching all of this in the European Union.
Well, Laura, we'll let you watch the famous black door to see if anybody else comes in and out, and we'll come back to you if there's any more news. Pfizer, listening to all of this and watching the way this is all unfolding, do you think now that Brexit, in the way that Theresa May outlined it, leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, is now under threat?
That I've been not clear about what the plan is for a long time, like a lot of people. I was just in Paris last week with a whole bunch of execs from Europe and the US, and then ministers from France and Germany. Every time they spoke about the UK, it was with a smirk, like, literally, this government right now is making us look like a joke. It's embarrassing, and people's jobs and livelihoods are on the line. And the only thing I can conclude, really, from looking at the last 2 years and these political shenanigans and the lack of vision and strategy, is that either people that have been wanting Brexit to happen for decades, like Ian Duncan Smith, have misled people and talked out what's possible, or they are just grossly incompetent. And people are probably thinking both right now.
Right. I mean, do we look a joke in the negotiations?
I think with the one bit of European negotiations where most of the 27 can agree in the face of a lot of very difficult European issues, from Italy to what's going on in the East, I think it's very easy to go down rabbit holes on this. We're talking about the international justiciability and the wording of a backstop proposal. But it all comes back to one big thing, which is that 2 years after the referendum, Theresa May and her cabinet and the government and Parliament have not decided the fundamental question of Brexit, which is this: are we going to be quite close to the European Union in how we exist post-Brexit, or are we going to take a big leap and try and forge a relationship with Asian countries, fast-growing economies, and try and change the way that we do our economy and our society in order to take advantage of other opportunities? That fundamental decision is what's going on today in microcosm.
Yes.
And it's one bit of because she hasn't taken the big decision, these techie little things, and I could forgive everybody for not understanding the detail, these techie little things can't get resolved because they haven't worked out the big picture plan, and that is the frightening.
Well, and this is a proxy for that conundrum,
Exactly.
as you have put it out. Do we stay closely aligned, or do we move further away from Europe? Does this, if today does become a day when there is a resignation, does that lead to an election, a leadership election, or even a general election further down the line, or is that another rabbit hole?
What it might do is lead to a settled view that Brexit isn't being delivered. Quite whether that results in a general election is very complicated because there are rules in place to stop a general election. I can't see anybody in their right mind on the Conservative Party or on the DUP voting for that, which you would need to do. But I think it will be incredibly toxic for politics if all of a sudden a whole bunch of Brexiteers just say that thing that you voted for 2 years ago is just suddenly not happening.
Has anyone asked you, Ian Duncan Smith, for your support in their leadership campaign?
No.
Nobody in the House of Commons has come up to you? Nobody has been going around the tea rooms talking to people that in the event that there were a vacancy, I'll be running?
No.
What do you think of what Sam Coates has said in terms of that fundamental argument? Will you feel betrayed if, in the end, it is not the big leap away from the EU, that in the end, because Parliament supports it, it'll be a much closer relationship?
Well, to be fair to Theresa May, I think she has defined in her speeches what it is. If you're leaving the customs union, the single market, taking back control of your laws, your borders, your money, then you are taking a much more detached position from your relationship with the European Union. The question then remains, and that's defined, the question then remains, what is that relationship between the two? And that can only be decided eventually when the European Union sits down and decides what it actually wants from it and puts that on the table alongside what the UK wants. And my point about this from the very beginning, and I have been critical from the very beginning, I did not think the government should have signed up to the European Union's negotiating stance. We should have been talking about the trading relationship first. That may have met exactly the point that you were making, which is that is the bigger picture. What's the relationship going to be? And from that, everything else flows. We've done it exactly the wrong way round.
All right.
Because you can't do it until you get to trade.
Well,
that's what we should be doing right now.
That terrible expression, we are where we are, Ian Duncan Smith.
Are we?
Well, I think so. More Kafkaesque comments here. Let's talk to Adam Fleming, who's in Brussels, our man in Brussels, in fact. So this proposal, Adam, was supposed to have reached EU negotiators today. I presume it hasn't yet because it doesn't look as if there has been sign-off and David Davis is still talking to Theresa May. What is the atmosphere? What are the expectations in Brussels?
So whenever you phone people dealing with Brexit in Brussels at the moment, the first thing they do is ask me what's happening and whether David Davis is going to stay as the Brexit
You've become very important
secretary.
in these negotiations, haven't you, Adam?
Yeah, basically. No, that's why it's good to listen to 20 minutes of the Daily Politics to actually find out.
Well done.
Anyway, let's get back to the substance of it. So I've been sent a list of questions that the EU will have about this UK customs proposal when it finally lands here in Brussels. And I'll go through them now. They're on my phone. Is it temporary? And what is the language about how long it will last? Because the EU doesn't want what they described as then having to discuss a backstop to the backstop. To what extent does the UK's proposal today solve the issue with the Irish border? Because remember, that is what the UK's intention in the talks this week with this paper is, which is to provide an alternative solution to avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland, an alternative to the proposal that's been put forward by the EU, which Theresa May said she couldn't sign up to. Then does the UK proposal respect the integrity of the EU's existing customs architecture? So surveillance, fraud, how do you deal with possibly illegal imports of Chinese subsidised steel, things like that? Then does the EU need to change its customs policy as a result of this? And what does it do about alignment with EU's rules and regulations, which is, remember, the other half of the equation when it comes to avoiding a hard border in Northern Ireland, because that's not just about customs, it's also about rules and regulations. So that's the list of tests that the EU has about this paper when they finally get to read it. I was chatting to somebody who's very close to the EU side of the negotiations, and I said, hang on, haven't you already pre-rejected this, pre-jected what the UK is going to put on the table? Intriguingly, they said, no, we haven't. We've just got this list of questions about it. So it's definitely not dead on arrival, as some commentators are suggesting.
OK, Adam, thank you very much in Brussels. We'll leave you and your questions and wait and see when that proposal does land in Brussels. Neil Richmond, are you looking more for guidance on the UK's position to the UK Parliament than the UK government?
No, the European negotiating team is negotiating in absolute good faith with David Davis and Theresa May, and that's the way the negotiation has been set up. And we can only, you can get lost talking about the internal dynamics of British politics. It's fascinating for us. We're addicted to watching British politics, but ultimately we have to negotiate directly with the Prime Minister and her Brexit Secretary. And as I said, we've been waiting an awful long time to get some detail. We have a political agreement from December. We've presented a legal interpretation of that. It's now up for the British to present their alternative. We haven't got it yet. We will obviously engage and read anything that comes, which we've always been open. We're open to any solutions, but we agree that the best solution is a deep and meaningful trading and customs relationship.
But you'd be happy, wouldn't you, if the UK did remove any time limit to remaining closely aligned to the EU's customs union? You'd be happy with that, wouldn't you? And then just leave it.
No, there's a lot more to that, and that's what we need to see. We need to see the paper, we need to see detail. We can't comment solely on hypotheticals. And one thing that's very clear is the backstop agreed in December for Ireland has to be solid, and it can't have a time limit.
Now, just to return briefly to David Davis, your colleague, he's still talking to Theresa May, and we'd all love to know what is being discussed. But this from another Conservative MP, Nadine Dorries, who tweeted, David Davis is ex-SAS. He's trained to survive. He's also trained to take people out. #Brexit. Do you like that sentiment?
Nadine has her own way of expressing political views. It's not exactly how I would describe it. I think that given the nature of this is always going to be, because of the nature of the government, don't have a majority, so that's the key thing. It's about negotiation internally as much as external negotiation. So
who should he take out, do you think, David Davis?
Well, you know, he can take out Nadine if he likes.
But in the cabinet,
I don't think he wants to go taking anybody out physically.
In the cabinet, I mean, I'm not talking literally. Who should be taken out by David Davis in the cabinet that would sort it out for you?
Listen, I'm not going to go down that road because I have my own views about individual competence, but I will leave them for myself. I think we simply say that we have, as usual, an internal negotiation going on. If we've done it once, we've done it 50 times, and at some point we'll bump into the system.
Final word from Sam before we say goodbye.
Because Ian can't say it, some of his friends in the Conservative Party would quite like to get rid of Ollie Robbins, the Theresa May's chief Europe negotiator. But what I think you've heard most clearly over the last half an hour is that the red lines from Brussels that Adam read out and what Ian and his friends want to see are completely incompatible. There is either a time limit or there is not. And there is no way of fudging that.
So we've come back to the beginning of our discussion then. Sam Coates, thank you very much for coming in. You two are going to stay with us for just a little bit longer. Now, the Supreme Court has rejected an appeal on Northern Ireland's abortion law. The court was looking into whether Northern Ireland's strict laws were in violation of the European Convention on Human Rights. Our Ireland correspondent, Emma Vardy, is outside the court now and can tell us more. Emma.
Well, the significant point that came out of today was really that the judges, although not formally ruling, did conclude by a majority that Northern Ireland's strict abortion laws are incompatible with human rights. Now, the case overall was dismissed on a technicality. Essentially, judges ruled that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, which brought the case, did not have the power to bring this kind of case, but said that if this case had been brought by an individual, a victim, a woman who had suffered as a result of these restrictive abortion laws, then they would have made a formal ruling that Northern Ireland's abortion laws as they currently stand are incompatible with human rights. And that came through really loud and clear. And that is now, of course, going to feed into the political debate over abortion which is taking place at Westminster, which is getting really heated right now with strong views on all sides on this, because just to remind viewers, of course, Northern Ireland remains the only place in the UK where there is a near ban on abortion, and it is still illegal, including in cases of rape, incest and fatal fetal abnormalities.
So, as you say, it now goes to the political arena as a result of this case being dismissed.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the judges made it very clear in their remarks that they were, directing their remarks at the people who do have the power to change the law, and that is MPs at Westminster, because, of course, Stormont, the Northern Ireland Assembly, power sharing there, collapsed 17 months ago. So whether there is a will or not amongst Northern Ireland politicians to change the law, there's no vehicle for it at the moment because there is no assembly sitting in Stormont. So, of course, that's why there's been increasing pressure, increasing calls over at Westminster for MPs to intervene and change the law. But we know, of course, why that is so difficult for Theresa May, because she relies on the support of the DUP, the Northern Ireland Party, which are very strongly anti-abortion. So any moves by Theresa May or the government to intervene in Northern Ireland's laws in this is going to create a big political row. But I think the comments from the Supreme Court judges today will be heard loud and clear over there at Westminster, albeit that the case, yes, it wasn't won by the campaigners, but we now know the views very clearly of the most senior judges in the UK, that they believe that the current law as it stands on abortion in Northern Ireland is incompatible with human rights.
Emma Vardy, thank you very much. Ian Duncan-Smith, you heard what Emma said. It's incompatible with human rights law. The majority of judges said so. Surely now there must be political pressure brought to bear to change the law in Northern Ireland on abortion.
Well, I think there is political pressure, and I'm sure it will grow. The only constraint we have here is that it's been very much the case that the Northern Ireland Assembly is responsible for making this decision. Now, I know and argue there is no assembly at the moment, but this is one of the drivers to say Sinn Féin and the DUP have got to get back together, because lots of issues are already erupting in Ireland, and we're trying to get. We don't want to take back direct control from Ireland. That's been one of the key elements of the Good Friday Agreement. We want them to have their say and them to run their own affairs. And so I don't think we should be interfering directly to tell them what to do. We can express an opinion about it, but they now must get together again and decide what they're going to do about it. Should
the government interfere? Should Westminster interfere, to use Ian Duncan-Smith's word, in Northern Irish affairs?
Yeah, I think this judgment today is very clear. What needs to happen is at least that aspect of abortion whereby there is some issues with the baby, where there's rape, etc. That is against human rights. And what Theresa May, let's be clear here, what Theresa May is doing by not intervening, by not doing anything, given that Stormont is not in action, is that she is picking her political career over the human rights of women. Let's just be clear about what that says today.
I don't think it's
but she could do something, couldn't she?
Well, look, where do you stop? So straight away we have this issue. We are trying to get the Assembly to get back together and start governing. Hold on a second. So you say on abortion because the Irish government had a referendum, suddenly we must intervene on that.
No, because now, it's the only part of the UK that doesn't have
hold
that.
On, yeah, but hold on a second. And then where else? There's lots of other issues where suddenly we have to take direct control. She has made it very clear. We do not want to take direct control. We want them to get back together again to resolve all of the issues that are outstanding, and they have to do it. And so the drive to get them back, everybody wants them. As I understand, the Irish government wants to come back together again. We need the Assembly back, and they should be sensible and actually start debating normally as they would have done.
It was a historic vote in Ireland, and a historic result. How much impact do you think that will have on the political debate around this in Northern Ireland?
It will have a massive impact. For the past 35 years, we in Ireland have simply exported our responsibilities to our women to the United Kingdom. 9 women every day were travelling to the United Kingdom for a termination. 3 were importing illegal abortion pills. Now you have the situation where women in Northern Ireland, not only do they have the option to travel to the United Kingdom, but they have the option just to pop over the border as well. So there is going to be pressure. It's unfortunate. I absolutely agree, believe it or not, with Ian, that we need to see Stormont coming back together. This is a devolved responsibility. There's areas, of course, like this, of marriage equality, where there's divergence in Northern Ireland from mainland UK. We need Stormont back together. We need the DUP and Sinn Féin to come to the tables with the other parties. The Irish government and the British government are working very, very closely on this. The Taoiseach has met Karen Bradley a number of times, and we need to see Stormont back as soon as possible.
Devolved issue, even rights of women in Northern Ireland. Be sitting again.
It doesn't seem to me that that's happening anytime soon. Absolutely, I agree that we want them to be back there. And I think the broader issue about abortion rights should be debated there. But this particular point about the human rights of women, that can change now.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Pleasure.
Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liz Truss, has been challenged by the UK hotel industry after praising companies like Airbnb. She said on Twitter that sharing economy firms were powering the economy and were the staples of my life. But British hoteliers say they're under pressure from rising costs, while the sharing economy faces fewer regulations and tax burdens. Well, our reporter Elizabeth Glinker is at an Airbnb property in South East London to tell us more. Lizzie.
Apartment in Woolwich in South East London. As you can see, it is very nice in here. In fact, the most recent Airbnb guests have only just left in sort of the last half an hour. So let's have a little bit of a look, have a bit of a nosy. Come through. Of course, this is the hallway, and in here, second bedroom. You can just see behind me, very nice. It's a 2-bedroom apartment into the main living area, very close to Woolwich Arsenal, which is just a couple of 100 metres that way. And of course, kitchen here, all mod cons. I feel like an estate agent. All mod cons in the kitchen. And yeah, very popular, increasingly something that a lot of us are doing when we go on holiday. Let's pop outside now and speak to the owner, Raquel Ramos. Hello, Raquel. Come and join us. Hello. So how much exactly does it cost to stay here a night?
It's around £100, and for 2 people, and 1 extra person, £20. So it's not a bad price. Now,
a lot of people in the hotel industry are quite upset with people like you, aren't they? Because they say you are undercutting them, you don't have to pay as many taxes, you don't have to adhere to as many regulations, and that's simply not fair.
It's very unfair because we do pay a lot of taxes, and they want us to pay. We are normal people, so we have to pay more taxes on top of that, and we have got only the 90-day period to rent. So, this is only paying our bills. This is not making us rich.
And yet they say you are undercutting them. That's their business. And there are calls by some people to impose more restrictions, to force all Airbnb providers to register, even if they're doing it for fewer than 90 days a year. So how do you feel about that?
It's not right. I think they should inspect more the hotels and not us. We are normal citizens, and we are not really making a lot of money like they do. We are just paying our bills. That's all. And so I think it should be the opposite. They should be inspected, and they should be observed a bit more careful.
Okay, Raquel Ramos, the owner of this Airbnb property in Woolwich, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for having us. Well, on a day like this, when the sun is shining, Woolwich Arsenal, just a couple of 100 metres that way, very nice. If we have a look down here, this is Crossrail. This is going to be the Elizabeth line station, so even better connections into central London. And perhaps you can see maybe why increasingly this kind of accommodation is becoming very popular, Joe.
You've sold it well, as you say, a little bit like an estate agent, and it looks very tidy in there, I have to say. Good to know some people live like that. Anyway, Rebecca,
very tidy. I have to say that Raquel was rushing around tidying before we came on air.
Unsurprisingly. Thank you very much. Rebecca Lowe from the free market think tank Freer joins us now. Welcome to the programme. Do you think companies like Airbnb need more regulation?
I think the reason most people like Airbnb is because it's efficient. I think it's an efficient use of efficient way to allocate resources. I think it's this is called peer-to-peer or sharing economy. It's think sharing is probably not quite the right word, it's still people paying for goods and services. It's a good way of cutting out transaction costs. It means that people who own something and they want to rent it out, or they'll have a service to provide, they're matched up with through information provided through a software platform to somebody who wants to use that. So we're cutting out traditional transaction costs. This is particularly good for people on low incomes who want to make a bit of extra money on the side.
Right. I mean, it's transformed the lives of people who don't earn enough money to pay for more expensive hotels in the main.
Yeah, look, there's a couple of issues. I, like many people, have stayed in Airbnb and get some of these helpful aspects of Airbnb. But one of the things that we've also found is there's been some unintended negative consequences, for instance, on the housing market. So in London, there's about 6% of the properties now that are Airbnb properties. In a situation where there's a housing crisis, that's problematic. And we've seen other cities like Barcelona and Los Angeles take action. And the other point as well is that there's a huge difference between those who own houses and don't own houses in terms of the inequality that is happening. So this is allowing homeowners to make and gain even more wealth. So, what you do then to redistribute some of that, and because they aren't paying as high taxes and sometimes avoiding paying many taxes at all, then, that redistributive element isn't happening. So it needs regulation.
Isn't it killing the hotel industry? And on the other hand, you're seeing cities literally empty of their residents as they sweat their assets, leading to a completely transient sort of population in the centre of some of the capital cities in Europe.
Well, first of all, my understanding is that there's a large economic benefit to local areas, particularly local areas where usually they don't have much tourism. But I'm not a representative of Airbnb, but what my awareness is that about 80%, particularly in larger cities, of those who rent out their homes through such programmes, they tend to live there, and often many of them are on low income, so there's a vast advantage to them. But also your point about wider economic benefits, and this can advantage the country as a whole. I don't think this is a case for regulation in terms of national government regulation. Sure, we've seen some local areas take action, and we've seen Airbnb be quite responsive to this. Actually, I mean, they have limits. I believe they have limits in London. Now, to my mind, these kind of limits, they get rid of competition, and it's not really surprising that the hotel industry is frustrated by these new competitors of the market, because the big hotels, like as ever with big corporations, they're generally in favour of the kind of protectionism, the kind of regulations which allow them to block new entrants to the market.
Yeah, if you overregulate it, you are going to stifle this thriving industry.
Well, look, this is about the balance of the impacts of this industry. And I think a lot of people would agree anything that is making the housing crisis worse is unhelpful.
Is it actually making it that much worse?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there is some evidence to demonstrate that, and not just in London, in cities across the world. And one of the things that needs to happen is if you're going to have Airbnb, you need to have all the right housing policies in place as well. So I'm not saying like we need to just get rid of Airbnb. What I'm saying is you need regulation, and you need the other policies to make sure that the housing market is working for residents.
To my mind, the biggest reason why the housing market is not working is because we have very illiberal regulations. We have a constrained supply owing to the high level of regulations in terms of planning restrictions.
It's not just supply, though, is it? It's also demand. There's so many people now, that gap between the housing haves and have-nots, there's so many people now with not just one but two places, whereas two houses, two flats that they own, whereas some people just have nothing at all. So it is on the demand side as well, especially somewhere in London where we've got the super rich buying off property, leaving it empty. That is also part of this story. So yes, we need to build more, but we need to do something about that demand side.
I think in terms of people who own property, I think there's also an important point which relates to that, and also relates to the point about Airbnb, and that's to do with property rights. If you own a home, you should be able to use it as you want. I believe there was a Supreme Court ruling in Texas just very recently about the way in which people are able to use their assets. And this new idea of the sharing economy, this is not going away. This is whether it's Uber, whether it's Airbnb, whether it's Deliveroo. This is the way for people, particularly those people on low incomes, particularly those people who want increased flexibility in their lives.
I mean,
a way to match up.
They've got massive issues with workers' rights and safety, and they also need regulation.
Well, actually,
it isn't just a matter of the sharing economy.
Usually, the main reasons why you would want regulation might be because you think there's asymmetric information, or it might be because you think that there are negative externalities. Now, the most negative impact of Airbnb is on the hotel industry, and it's not really surprising that they're complaining about this. In terms of information, these new software platforms are very, 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 very excellent ways to inform people. You have rating systems, you have safety, and you have quality assurance through you being able to access that information yourself, cutting out the middleman, thereby cutting down transaction costs.
Rebecca, thank you very much for coming in. I'm just going to update our audience, our viewers, with the latest on that meeting between David Davis and Theresa May. A source close to the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, says obviously there's been back and forth on this paper, understatement there, as there always is whenever the government publishes anything. The backstop paper has been amended and now expresses in much more detail the time-limited nature of our proposal, something the Prime Minister and David Davis have always been committed to. So there is an element of time limitation. What we won't know is whether that is rock solid or flexible. But that is the latest coming on those Brexit negotiations. Now, Airbnb aren't the only disruptors in the digital economy. New research published today suggests that job losses from automation will overwhelmingly affect the working class. The analysis by Redshift, which covers England, says that while new jobs will be created, millions of low-paid jobs are at risk from automation. It suggests that 5 times more working-class jobs are expected to be lost through automation than were lost in the running down of the coal and steel industries in the 1980s. More than 1 million jobs are expected to be lost amongst the poorest 10% of UK workers. Amongst the bottom 25% of the job market, where workers earn less than £9 an hour, more than 2 million jobs are at high risk of automation. And in a survey for the think tank, a quarter of people thought the government wasn't doing enough in response to automation in the workplace. Well, to discuss this is the Labour MP Liam Byrne, who is also Shadow Digital Minister, who assembled the report, which would make sense, I presume, wouldn't it? The clue's in the title.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about it?
So I think we've got to do 2 things. We've got to start looking at how we create new jobs. So ideas like regional investment banks, new investment in technology, creating those new jobs for people to move to. That's thing 1 we've got to do. Thing 2 we've got to do is we're probably going to have to reinvent the way our social security system works so that actually people can get retrained when their old job is automated. What was really, really striking about the polling was that 70% of people thought that it was government's job to help retrain workers for new jobs. Right now, though, if you're, say, in your 50s and you lose your job, you'll have paid in about £105,000 of national insurance. So you paid in a lot. If you lose your job, you're sent down the job centre like everybody else. You don't get any extra help retraining. So there's quite a big change in the kind of the social safety net that we need to create in Britain to help the country move on.
What are these new jobs that people are going to do?
So we don't know, and if you look back over the last couple of 100 years, whenever there's a big industrial revolution, new jobs are created, and they're quite hard to predict. But we do know that they're going to be jobs that involve what the economists call non-routine work, so stuff that can't be automated by robots. And part of the reason for publishing the report is to say, look, we've got to get focused now on where the impact is going to be, because during the 80s, we didn't think through how we were going to help communities adapt and change when coal and steel and shipbuilding was shut down. Let's not make that mistake again. Let's look at what we know is coming down the track and start making preparations today.
Is it the government's responsibility to look at retraining what could be hundreds of thousands of people to be prepared, millions of people,
3 million
to be
people.
prepared for these new jobs?
Yeah, look, it is partly the government's responsibility because this is such profound structural change in the economy. This isn't one where you can just blame people for losing their jobs. We're going through, the fourth revolution in tech, as you would say, and they do need to take control, and they haven't been doing that. I mean, one of my frustrations for Brexit, for instance, about Brexit is that we're not thinking about these other issues that are so important.
Although employment levels, of course, are very high, aren't they, at the moment?
But if you look at the proportion in zero-hour contracts, self-employed that is quite low paid, there's some real issues about the quality of work, and there's some real issues about how much debt households are in. So something doesn't quite add up there in terms of, yes, they're in work, but that work doesn't seem to give them the kind of well-being that you would expect. And so there's a few things that need to happen, and I agree it's partly the government's role. I heard a very senior exec recently say that if they don't do something about the education system in particular, then there won't just be a fourth revolution, there'll actually just be a revolution.
And what needs to be done about the education system?
I think that businesses have to be, if they're going to say they need people to be reskilled all the time and things are moving on, then they need to pay more in taxes and make sure that we have that funding there to invest in education. But other things as well, like universal basic services, for instance. We've spoken a lot about what we need to do in social security and income. But if housing is cheaper, if your internet is free, if transport is cheaper, then that just makes it much easier for everyone to live a decent life.
But would you accept that people have been quite nimble in the recession that we've gone through in order to either start their own businesses, their own companies? They have found employment themselves.
They have, but it's very insecure. So about 1 in 5 workers now work in the gig economy. That's the same number of people as work in the public sector now.
And well, we're not going to see more of that in the future.
Well, I think possibly, and the risk is that those people are not blessed with the same kind of employment rights as anybody else. And crucially, they're not helped to develop assets. So they're not helped to develop savings or deposits for a home, or crucially, saving into a pension. And so the social security system is going to have to change, so it basically helps people build up assets over the course of their life, as well as retrain. And look, if we don't get this right, the current trends in inequality are just going to grow and grow. So we think that by 2030, if current trends persist, the top 1% will control 2/3 of global wealth. If we don't change the system to help working people get richer and prosper in the future, that is the outcome that we're looking at. So we're at a fork in the road.
Liam Byrne, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, one statistic that has been doing the rounds on social media has got people all riled up. And no, it's not the number of exemptions to the EU's Posted Workers Directive, thank goodness for that, or a dispute over what the Bank of England's base rate should be. The stat that has got people talking is this. More Brits applied for TV show Love Island, 85,000 of them, than to study at Oxbridge this year, 23,500. So which has more to offer? Well, in June, temperatures can reach a high of 28 degrees in the Love Island villa in Majorca. For Oxford and Cambridge, it's cooler, but still pleasant at 19 degrees Celsius. But is Love Island or Oxbridge better for your career prospects? The average Oxbridge graduate earned £400,000 over their career, more than those who went to other universities, according to a 2015 study. The Islanders get a £200 a week basic salary and the prospect of £50,000 prize money if they win. And what about finding love? Such old romantics on this programme. Last year's Love Island winners, Kem and Amber, have split up. But Jamie and Camilla remain an item. And Dom and Jess are engaged. Oxford is the city students are most likely to find love in, according to one study, with 35% of students meeting the love of their lives among the dreaming spires, including Prime Minister Theresa May and her very own dreamboat, husband Philip May. Well, let's discuss all this with former Love Island winner Jess Hayes. She's in the city of Dreaming Spires, Oxford. Nimco Ali and Anoush Chakelian are with me in the studio. Well, welcome, first of all. What's your view of Love Island?
I like it. I watched it and I got into it last year as the general election was going on, but I just find it's really depressing.
What's depressing about it?
I think it's depressing that young people are actually aspiring to go on TV as opposed to go to universities that could actually set up for their career.
What do you think, Jessica?
I just don't think that's really the case. I think, you know, you have to... I don't think that that's the case at all.
Why? Why not? Why is it better to go for Love Island than it is to go to Oxford or Cambridge?
I think, you know, you can go to university and you can rack up a load of debt, you might do your degree and stuff like that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're secured in a job. At the end of the day, Love Island gives you great opportunities. It might not be for everyone, but you build yourself a platform, you can go on to raise awareness for certain things, and I don't think you need to go to university to be successful.
Right, and was it good for you? Has it been good for you?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I've I've been self-employed now for 3 years. I'm running my own business. I'm a fashion blogger. I've had some amazing experiences, and I'm not academic in that way. But like I said, I don't think you need to go to university to be successful.
Well, that sounds like a pretty bright future.
No, there is a bright future. Actually, I'm not knocking these young people for going onto the show, but I am knocking the fact that more people are applying for a TV show than they are for going to a university like Oxbridge. And I do think that the ratio with 2 black people on the show is the same as what it is at Oxbridge and Cambridge. So if more of us apply, then we can get in. I have 4 young cousins and nephews and nieces, and they are all going to aspire to go to university. And I want more young people from my community specifically to do that.
Is it about reality TV now being the thing to aim for, and should it not be?
I don't think that can be the comparison, because people have different aspirations, don't they? I mean, of course, Love Island can be a great platform for people who want to go into modelling or TV or to be fitness instructors or even to raise awareness about issues. I mean, Jamie, you mentioned at the beginning of the programme, he's been talking about the effects of social media on mental health. So they want to go and do that. People who apply for Oxford and Cambridge want to have a more academic career. I mean, our society is obsessed with both things. Our society is obsessed with Oxford and Cambridge and academia, and our society is obsessed with reality TV.
Do you think there's a bit of a social snobbery, Pfizer, about people, 85,000 wanting to go on Love Island, and why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an element of class snobbery that is involved in this, and it really does bug me. I think actually the comparison is not direct anyway, because the age group is much bigger for who can go on Love Island versus university. I mean, Oxford and Cambridge are incredibly elitist universities. Not everyone applies to those places. And one thing I would say is that we're sort of making this distinction between either or. Isn't there a doctor on there right now, Love Island?
Yeah, apparently.
Some of them have gone to university, so we shouldn't be doing that.
Right, Jessica, you're laughing. Why are you laughing?
No, there's a doctor on there now, there's a solicitor. I think it's down to people what they want to do. They might go and do a degree, and then they might think, this isn't for me, I'm going to give this a go. I think it's just down to the person and what they want, really. I think it's an irrelevant comparison, if I'm honest. I think, like you say, Oxford and Cambridge are really hard to get into. I think the comparison's irrelevant.
We need to give young people better aspirations, and I think it's fine to see. I feel really uncomfortable in knocking people for going on to this show, and I don't want to feel like a snob. But ultimately, it is about giving young people better aspirations and telling them that they can apply to Oxford, Cambridge, Bristol, Exeter. Because I do think Oxford and Cambridge are getting a hard time right now, but Exeter, Bristol, Durham are all as elitist as other places. But unless we break down these barriers by telling young people that they have a position to be there, then they're not going to happen. That's not going to happen. So I really just want more young people to apply. I want as many young people to apply for Love Island as they are for universities.
You wouldn't disagree with that, would you?
I wouldn't disagree with that. I do think, the entrance criteria in itself is restrictive, but also,
So is this. Have you seen any of those people? They're all about like a size 2, the hands, the number of so I think you could actually spend time in the gym or spend time in the library.
I mean, that's true, isn't it, Jessica? Everyone's extremely beautiful, aren't they, who go on to Love Island. So in a way, it's also pretty elitist and restrictive.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. In some ways, I don't know really. I mean.
Yes, you do. Everyone is very good looking who goes on that programme. And that wouldn't necessarily, I know beauty is in the eye of the beholder and all that, but it wouldn't apply to everybody, would it?
No, but then I guess, I don't know. Not everyone's academic enough to go to uni, so I guess it works.
You mean it equals itself out? What do you think, Pfizer? In that sense, it's just as unreachable going on Love Island than going to Oxford and Cambridge might be.
There's some pretty hot people on there, let's face it.
Anyone you want to mention specifically, Pfizer?
One thing I would say, I'm a married woman. One thing I would say is that there's something in this story that is a bit like, look, the state of society. I can tell you that coming from a working class background and going to Oxford, there's nothing that showed me there was something wrong with the world than hanging out with a whole bunch of Oxbridge graduates, I can tell you. And so that comparison really annoys me.
But what about then universities in general?
Of course, absolutely. Actually, more young people are applying, and we need to encourage more of that. Absolutely, we should. But I just think that this conversation and the way that it has been framed, there's real elements of class snobbery in it, and I
do agree with that, and I feel uncomfortable in that sense. But ultimately, I just want us to see what it's saying, and the fact that I don't want to knock you as well. But everybody there are putting in so much time into their looks, and I think that's what we're talking about, social media, and the fact that we're counting Instagram likes as opposed to GCSEs or A-levels, all these kind of things. We are setting kids against each other as well.
Both, though. I think people are doing both things. So I think, but absolutely, I agree. We also don't want to continue on this
Yeah.
road of like looking perfect, which is also very unhelpful for young people, and Instagram is causing all kinds of mental health issues.
Right, now, has everyone... I mean, clearly, Jessica, as you said, you've watched it. You've watched it, have you?
Yeah, I really
And
enjoy
like it?
Yeah.
Faiza?
I mean, people need a distraction.
Do you watch
like,
it?
Things are difficult. I don't watch it religiously. I'll flick through.
Just most of the time.
Catch a bit of it. No, honestly.
I think I need to start watching it, clearly. Ladies, thank you all very much for coming in to discuss Love Island. That's it for today. Thanks to all of our guests on a busy, packed programme. Andrew will be on BBC One tonight, but from all of us here, have a very good afternoon. I'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.